Welcome to this virtual class sponsored by BYU Library Family History in Provo, Utah. Our class today will be Intermediate Ancestry Series Part 1, Searching Census Records, and be presented by Nancy Busby. Nancy has an extensive background in family history and genealogical research, and we're grateful that she's willing to share her methods with us and tips on this subject. So I'll now turn the time over to you, Nancy.
Hi, everybody. I am Nancy Busby, and I will be presenting today's class. This one is going to be on searching U.S. Census records, so hopefully we can give you a few things to think about to help you in your efforts to do your family history. All right, so on Ancestry's website, they have a pretty good selection of census forms, and I'm focusing on U.S. Census records today for this presentation, but you can also find census records for other countries available in Ancestry also. But a lot of the principles that we'll talk about, you'll see kind of repeated from place to place. There are also state censuses that also have records available, that sort of thing. The census forms are nice to have because if you want to print them off and write down the information that you're finding online, that can be kind of handy to use as a worksheet. And it also has all of the column heading titles printed, so they're very legible and easy to see. I find that sometimes the imaging of the census records can be blurry sometimes, a little bit harder to focus in on, to make out, especially the older ones, to make out exactly what it says. So US Census records are released 72 years after the census year. So for instance, last year in 2022, we were able to access and take a look at the 1950 census year. So that was the most recent one in the United States that was released. So that was pretty exciting for people to take a look at and learn new information about their families living in the United States at that time. These U.S. Census records start in 1790, and this screenshot image just shows you an example of what that 1790 census looks like. So on here and for several decades following, the records had the head of household, and it would list the number of individuals in the house, so males or females. And in this time frame, it would also designate by age groups. So males under the age of 16 or over the age of 16, if they were free persons or not. And also there's a column that lists if there were any slaves under the head of household at that time. And the worksheet that you can download, you can see that's pretty nice that it lists all those columns. It just gives you a really neat format to be able to copy that information. The way that I use these census records that are in these earlier eras where it only lists the name of the head of household, because it's listing the names of the number of children under the age of 16, you can kind of go, oh, okay, we've got so many males and so many females, and in those age groups, and then look at the next decade, the 1800, and kind of see how that household might have changed. And then you just start comparing those until you get to 1850. So the 1800 census, these can be a little messy and intimidating to take a look at, hard to read for some folks. But the nice thing about looking at it online, when you look at the actual original record, is you can zoom in and out. And also remember that in Ancestry, you have the option when you're looking at records to change the background to like right now we're seeing a white background with black print, and you can actually flip the image so that it reverses that, so the background is black and the foreground writing is in white. If you're ever having a hard time reading records of any kind that are originals, sometimes that will kind of help those letters and those names pop out. So remember to try that option if you feel like you're having a hard time reading things. 1800 is nice because that is going to give you a tighter breakdown of the age groups rather than just below the age of 16. So we've got under 10, 10 through 15, 16 through 25, 26 through 44, 45 and older. So then you can kind of start to get an idea of the grouping of the ages of different children in a family, or possibly people who are living there. That's what makes it a little bit tricky on this time, but you can glean information about the families and who was living on the property during these decades. And the 1810 census is quite similar. You'll see the columns with the numbers giving the number of people under those different heading titles. And 1810, again, very similar. Moving on to the 1820 census, we have the same kind of format. There's a little bit more detail in the description of the individuals in those different age groups. And as you move through to the 1830 census, you will see that the description breaks those categories down even a little more tightly. So as each decade proceeds, you might find that you're getting slightly more and more information as those families change over the years. You can see as children kind of age up into the next category or leave the household, and where they might have gone is the next thing to figure out. But we'll talk about a couple ideas of looking at that. Sometimes people just moved down the road and stayed pretty close in these time frames. So going on to the 1840 census, again, we have the different categories that break down the males and the females living in the households. You've got some information about pensioners for the Revolutionary War or any military service that they might have served in. Also, the occupation that the family is employed in, the different individuals, what their occupation might have been, and if they were deaf, dumb, or blind, or insane. So those can be kind of interesting. And then there's also a category at the end for their schooling. And as you scroll down on the Ancestry page, it has the also census forms for the UK and Canadian. So just scroll up and down on Ancestry's census forms page to get those different census records. Okay, moving on to the 1850 census. Here's another example. This one happens to be in North Carolina, but it's the federal census that we're looking at in this case, so they're going to be very similar from state to state. Also, make sure that you take a look at the top of the heading of each of these original census records to look at where they're located, what county they're in. It also gives the date of the census. So I've found that to be helpful if maybe I have a record that somebody got married in August or in June, and I want to look and see, well, what was the date of the census that was taken for this family, and how does that go along with other information that I know about them? As you can see, if you notice here in the 1850 census, we've got the family, head of household, and the individuals, at least their first names, and usually they just do a ditto sign for the last name. So you've got all of the names of the families and their age and their sex and what the occupation is if they're working. You've got the their place of birth, if they're married, and if they attended school within the last year, and also if they can read and write. So make sure you take a look at each of the headings for each year, because there are slight variations from year to year, even though at a glance, especially those early years where it's just a name and a whole bunch of numbers, you might think, oh, I'm not getting much out of that, but make sure you take a look at these forms so you know what each of the heading titles are telling you. 1860 census is going to be fairly similar to 1850. Again, just take a look at the location where the census is taking place. And yeah, take a look at the form, and you'll see this one asks if they were married within the year. So that kind of gives you an idea of how long a person was married. It might be hard to find a marriage record for someone in 1860, but if they were married within the year, you can nail that down pretty good for an approximate marriage date. If they've got that checked or not checked, you'll know that it didn't happen. Let me back that up just a little bit about what you know from the census records. So a census record is only as good as the person giving the information and the person writing down the information, right? So don't be alarmed if from decade to decade, census to census, you see a variation maybe in a person's age, or when they say they were born, or even where they were born, not just their age, but sometimes you'll get people answer differently, or maybe mom and dad weren't home and the oldest child was there answering the questions the census taker was answering. You don't know who was giving the information. So it's always good to look for as many census records as you can, along with other vital records that go along with that, birth, marriage, and death. But the more records you have that confirm information that matches across the board, it gives you a stronger likelihood that information is correct. But like I've had family members where I go to a census and from 1850, 60, and 70, it lists a different state for their birth. But that kind of clues me in that, I've got to look for birth records for this person and their families and in all of these different locations and see which one is right and find that out. So if you do find conflicting information, just use that as a jump off point of clues of where to look next for other kinds of records. So the 1870 census is going to talk about their education. If they were born within the year, it will actually list the month they were born. If they were born within so if they're under the age of 1 when the census was taken. You'll also notice there is a column on the far right here that talks about their constitutional relations. So this has to do with the Civil War and if they are citizens of the United States or not. So anyone that was in the Confederate Army, for instance, I have ancestors that were in the South, and they had to fill out paperwork that said they were loyal to the United States of America after the war so that they could register to vote again, those kinds of things. So there's all kinds of interesting things you can find out from a census record that will lead you to looking for other things. Okay, 1880 census. 1880 is adding more information. Let's see. Yeah, I think 1880, just wanted to double check. Oh yeah, 1870 also has the birthplace of the father and mother. So 1880 is also listing that. The format looks a little bit different on the form, but it's the same information. And in these later census records after 1850 are also telling the relationship to the head of household. So make sure you pay attention to that. If you see that relationship is brother-in-law, just know that is the relation to the person listed as the head of household. So a brother-in-law to the head of household is likely or could be a sibling of the wife. And I have found a woman's maiden name by being able to see that her brother was living in the household and seeing what his last name was, and then able to find their family with that same brother and the wife as children under that same surname. So that kind of helped me find a maiden name for a wife too. So pay attention to all those relationships as they're listed in these census records as well. Okay, now we get to the really saddest part of census records in the United States. We'll have to pause and shed a tear. The 1890 census was over 99% destroyed in a Commerce Department fire in 1921. There were almost 63 million records of people, or names of individuals on that census, and only about 6,000 survived the fire. So if you are one of the lucky few who has an ancestor that survived the 1890 fire, you'll have to put it in the chat and let us know. I haven't met anyone yet, and I haven't found any of my family. So what can you do about this gap? For a lot of years, I just kind of went, that's too bad, and kind of skip over it and hope you can find enough information in the 1900 census. But if you're really focused in on using census records for your research, just remember there are other ways to kind of try to fill in those gaps. So here's a list of all of the different state census records and the year that those states did a census. And this can be found at www.census.gov. I've got the complete URL on this slide if you wanted to follow that to get there. But anyway, this will give you a link to all of those, a list of all of those records. And many of these records are also available on Ancestry. I've definitely utilized these in doing research in Kansas and in New York and in Colorado and in Pennsylvania. There have been times where you find out maybe a little slightly different information, and just as good as finding out different information from, based on the information that they're asking, is to find the same information. So you can be like, okay, we've definitely got the right family here. These are the same people. They're born the same years. That's always very helpful too, right? So don't forget to look at your state census records. The states that had census records around that 1890 timeframe, I have listed on this slide. And I'm not going to read through them all, but you can take a look at these and grab a screenshot of it if you want to, or if you download my slide deck, you have access to that to look at. But I just kind of use this as a shortcut for you to take a glance and see if there are states that your ancestors lived in during that 1890 timeframe that you might want to take a look at the state census and see if you can find them where you felt like you were missing information before. Also, if you go to the Ancestry census and voter lists, there is a search you can do for the 1890 census substitute, they call it. And this isn't a formal substitute that was put together by the government or anything, but what it is a search engine to help you as a researcher kind of determine what other kinds of records are out there that I might be able to find my people at. And so there is a vast collection of options that it searches. And you'll notice that if you find your way here, over on the right, it says view all collections included in this search. If you click on that, it's going to list all the types of collections that it is drawing from doing the searches for this particular data search. And this slide just shows you the top group. This is what the A through F, and it goes on and on from there. So if there is a specific collection that you want to look at, you can click on that and scroll down to the exact county or town, state that you want to do that, to execute that search in. Or you can just put the name, birth, death information, father, mother, siblings, etc. Anything you can just put in this search engine and it will search through all of them. But if you only want to bring up results from a specific location, you can also go here and look up the exact location that you want to execute a search for your ancestor. Okay, so if you are one of the few lucky 6,000 that have your name and you're one of their descendants, and you want to take a look and see if you can find them, this lists the states that had some surviving fragments, pages, or pieces. So it is definitely not comprehensive for each state. There are only 1,200 pages or pieces that survive. So we've got Alabama, District of Columbia, Georgia, Illinois, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, South Dakota, and Texas. And just as a personal example, I have ancestors that were living in Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas during that time frame, and I haven't been fortunate enough to find any of them on those pages. But anyway, you are welcome to take a look in your and it will do a search for these as well when you do a search in Ancestry, or you can access those through the Census government website as well and take a look at them. So if you're curious to know what that census looked like, here is an example of what the 1890 census looked like and list of the questions they asked. There was significantly more information from the decade before, so we're all very sad that it's missing, but nevertheless, we move forward without it, don't we? And then there is a form that you can download on this one as well. And if you're curious to see the kinds of questions that were asked, this is where you'll find that. This is the 1900 census, and my most favorite thing about the 1900 census is that it asks for women who had children. It asks how many children they gave birth to and how many are living. And this is a great resource if you're trying to track down all of the children that were born to a family. You can just do a little math, see how many kids are listed with the family currently and what the mom answered. Hopefully it was the mom answering right. Again, I've found incorrect information here from time to time. We'll just give the census taker and the people giving the information a little bit of a break. There are bound to be some errors here and there, but more often than not, I have found that I'm getting some great helpful information by looking especially at those columns from the 1900 forward. And again, you can see the questions they're asking about home ownership, if it's a farm or a house, descriptions of the people. They continue asking the birthplace of father and mother. You also have, I believe 1880 had this too, but the natural questions about naturalization, what year they naturalized, if they were an immigrant to the country. This can help you if you start looking for immigration records to get an idea of what year range to be looking for people. So take note of that on these different census years. If that question is included also, if you have immigrants and you want to start looking for immigration records, you can glean some clues to that off of these as well. It's just as a close-up of some of those questions that ask. I think it's interesting that they ask how many months they were not employed that year. So just get a little snapshot into a year in the life of your ancestor, what their employment was like. All right, the 1910 census comes up next. These pages are getting bigger and more full of information. We like that as family historians, right? So 1910 census is going to designate, again, more about their employment, whether they were out of work on April 15th. I don't know why they wanted to know that, but there you go. Maybe it had to do with taxes. I'm not sure. The number of weeks out of work during 1909 and their education level, again, about their ownership, whether they're a survivor of the Union or Confederate Army or Navy, whether they're blind in both eyes or not. So if you've looked at census records before and the only thing you got was their name their siblings, their parents, their age, where they're from, or where they were born and where their parents were born. There's a lot more on there. So go back to your census records and see what else you can learn. And here's an example of the 1920 census and the form that you can use to fill out the information you find there. It's also asking the mother tongue of the individual and their father and mother on this one. So if you don't know a lot about that, you can find them on this census year. You'll learn more information about that. 1930, take you through here. It continues to ask information about their veteran status and relationships to the person. It's always head of household, so keep that in mind. And moving on to the 1940 census, there's quite a bit of information here. So there are actually 2 pages for the, if you want to transcribe that off on these forms, make sure you get both pages to fill in each of those columns. These are really, really helpful to have these forms. I'm so grateful that we can download them. You don't have to rewrite those. And the 1950 census, which is a really fun one. I actually was looking at the 1950 census with my brother-in-law, and he was looking up his parents here. And I know it's hard to make out the exact writing on, on the screen here, but you can go ahead and pull up a 1950 census and take a look at it yourself. But every about, what is it, fifth or sixth line, you'll see this little symbol that kind of bumps out here on the very far left column where it has the numbers of the individuals on that page. So each person that is listed with that little bump out, if you go to the bottom of the form, that gives you more extensive information about that person. And my brother-in-law's father happened to fall on this line, and it gave a whole lot more information about his income and his employment and his education and all kinds of fun things that he was able to see that were collected from that census record. So 1950 census, make sure you take a look at the individual that falls on that line in the family and see if it has any additional information that you might find out. And these forms are in this lovely 1950s green ink, which you gotta love. That's what the originals look like in color. Now I'm going to just give you a few little tips and tricks when you're looking at census records, some things that you can do to enhance your search and possibly give you some ideas to go back and look for someone again that maybe you weren't able to find. So when you go to the homepage and you're just on Ancestry's homepage, scroll down. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see special record collections. This is what I use when I want to look for a specific decade's census. The times when I most often use this method of doing a census search is when, if I'm looking at an individual on my tree, I'll look at the sources that we've collected as a family, and if I see any gaps in any of those census years, then I don't want to just do a general search for John Smith in Cave Springs, Florida, or Cave Springs, Georgia. I want to look for the specific census year that I don't have a census record for that person. So I will click on, say, the 1870 census, so I can directly go to that. Or in this example, I pulled up the 1860. And when I'm looking for gap years of a census for a person, I typically will start with just putting in their surname and make sure you do not check the exact box so that it will bring up any variations of spelling. And I will put the location. So in this case, I typed in Cave Springs, Floyd, Georgia. So I have the city, the county, and the state. And when you do a search like this, it is going to bring up hopefully. But in this example, and when I've done it before, this is how it works. It is going to bring up all of the people with that surname that lived in that particular city. So I know they did a census in Cave Spring, and I want to see all of the Dempseys so I can kind of scroll through and have my family list and go, okay, we know about that guy, check, 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 and see if there's anybody like, oh, I don't know who this Elizabeth Dempsey, born about 1802 in South Carolina. I'm not sure who she is. I better go look at that, and I can click on view record. If you decide you do want, if there are too many, like if you have a very common surname, a Smith or a Jones, or just it could even be just a surname that is common in that area, there might be, too many pages that you need to go through. You just click on this little pencil to edit your search. You can go back, and it will take you back to the search engine beginning point, and you can type in the name and click search again if you're getting too many results coming up. But the nice thing about it is it's going to hone in on just that surname that I want to do a search for in that specific census year. So this is a search engine where I put in the name and the location. And I scroll down over here on the left to look at the different filters that are available. So this is another way to kind of filter through information. If it's bringing up any results that are outside of that locality that you want, you can tell it to look specifically in North America and drill down through those filters. I want North America, United States, Georgia, Floyd County. Here are the different cities within Floyd County, and I can see how many records there are for each of these cities. So maybe I've exhausted all of the people in a search for that particular city, but maybe I want to look at some of the adjacent cities. This is one way that you can get to the different cities that are adjacent. So you'll hopefully look on a map, see what the surrounding cities are to the one that you've been kind of zeroed in on, and then you can click on those individual cities and take a look at the records that are there. And this gives you an idea of how many records there are for you to sift through. So that can be nice as well. So you can also do a filter. So if you've done a search, but you're getting information that is not specific to the census or the year that you want, you can also filter by the census year over here on the left by clicking on that filter and then clicking on the year that it's going to, and they have it highlighted in gray if a year is not available for that location, and in blue that you can click on to bring up the census for that specific year associated with the search information you put in. And in this example, I said I wanted to see the 1880s, and now I can see that there are two possibilities for that search, and it's going to immediately populate over here. And with the information I put in my search and with this filter, it narrowed it down to just nine options. So make sure you use those filters to your advantage if you're getting too many results that you don't have time to sift through, because sometimes you can end up with hundreds of pages or thousands of results. So using these filters on the left is going to help you narrow those down. So when I click on the name of the census and I click on view, that's going to take you to a view of the original census. And you'll notice that at the bottom here, and you can grab this little bar with your mouse and click and drag so you can see more names. It has the names that are as they were indexed along the bottom here. And they're the individual who I clicked on from that search. So this one was listing Elizabeth Dempsey. So she is highlighted in yellow. And not every census does this exactly, but if you do see this, the way they're highlighting, I think most of them do, but if it doesn't do it, that's just the nature of their hundreds and thousands of documents, but most of them I've seen do. So anyway, you will see her name highlighted in yellow, and then the people in the household adjacent to her are highlighted in green, and that is also reflected in the extracted information down below. All right, I'm going to go over something that could be helpful to you. So this is how to copy data into a spreadsheet. If you haven't tried this before, I've had several people respond after seeing this presentation last year that was very helpful. So hopefully it gives you a different way to take a look at things. So once you find your ancestor in the census, so here we have Elizabeth. I will also note, and I might bring this up again later, but I'll also note that her name is Dempsey with a D, and you'll see that the extraction, the way they typed it up was they read it as a P, so it came up as Pempsey. And so this is another reason to toggle on or off that exact spelling button in your searches under a person's name, because these are definitely my people. So anyway, so find your ancestor on the census. You want to note the image number. So down at the bottom of the image, on this one it says 15 of 20. So we're on image 15. You want to go back about 10 pages plus or minus, forward about 10 pages plus or minus, and search for these people, this surname also. And the reason you want to do that is because often families lived down the road from each other, around the corner from each other. People who their children married, you will see the surnames of those families showing up, in the neighboring pages, because they were all living pretty, their farms were adjacent to one another. And those were the people who they went to school with, went to church with, interacted with at the town square, buying and selling, living their lives. So these are the people who they knew, and often families lived near each other, and so kind of go back and forth from those pages. So getting these into a spreadsheet, you want to click on a line from the list below, and then do Control+A, which is select all. So you'd have to click down here on this index list on one line and do Control+A, and that will select all the names. And then you want to, after you've selected everything, it's going to highlight it. You want to do Control+C, which is copy. It is different if you're on a Mac device. Let's see, it's been a while since I've done a Mac. Somebody put it in the chat. Some of you Mac users out there. Control+C to copy, whatever your copy shortcut is. And then open, in this case, I have an Excel document, and you want to right click. So click in the top left corner and right click your mouse and click on Paste Special. And you want to make sure that paste that little button is toggled on, and you want to paste text. Make sure that is highlighted and click OK. And this is going to paste everything that copied. These first few lines is everything that it copied from. Let me go back to that slide. Everything that it copied. You see how it highlighted in blue, the name of the census, the city, the county, the state, page 15 of 20, National Archives, everything that's highlighted in blue, it grabbed. So if you don't need that information, you can just go ahead and delete those lines, or you can just gray them out. If you want to keep that information for any reason. But I generally will just highlight all of those pages or those lines in the Excel document and right click and hit delete. And then I will insert a line on the left, to the left of the dwelling, and I'm going to hand type in image. Remember, I told you to take note of which image you're on. So you want to label each of these people in terms of what image they're on. It does not capture that information for the spreadsheet. So you can just type in the image number on the first line. And in Excel, there's a little green dot at the corner. And if you grab that and just drag, click and drag, it's going to populate and drag it all the way down for all the people on that page. The other thing that I want to do is highlight the top line and go to the View tab and click on Freeze Panes. And this will have you freeze that top row. So as you start scrolling up and down, that top row that is the heading information will remain static as you scroll up and down. You can also rename your sheet. So on the bottom left is a little tab that says the sheet number. It's going to default something like sheet 1. You can right click on that to rename it. And I've named that the 1860 Cave Spring. So from the home page, you can come over here to the sort filter, or the home tab, sorry, not home page, but the home tab. Come over to the sort and filter option and click on custom sort. And here you can click on this sort by pull down under this left column and select surname. So this is pulling all of the different headings that you used initially to freeze that top row. It's using all of those as your sort filter. So you could sort by birth year, you can sort by age, you could sort by dwelling number or occupation, whatever suits your fancy. But I don't know, I usually use surname. So anyway, surname and then click OK. And now it is going to group all of the people from that entire range of pages that I copied into the spreadsheet. In this example, now you'll see over here on the left, there's image 6, 9, 10, 15. So a few slides back, I said you want to go forward and backward from the individual family that you have, 10 or so pages. You can go more or less, your choice, but you have to do that whole copy paste thing for each image. And that's when, as I paste the image in, I tell what the image number is. I drag that down for all the people that are on that image. And then as you do your sorts, where I know that, oh, if I go to image 6, I'm going to see all of these people with this last name. And if I go to image 9, I'm going to see all of these people that are listed. So that is going to help me do a surname search and keep it in a spreadsheet. You can insert comments on these. You can insert extra columns if you want to add notes about individuals. You could put what your relationship is to these people. You could say need to research. You can use this as a research worksheet at that point. So the steps starting here, you want to just do this for each image number. So this showed you doing image 15, but then I go back and I do image 14, copy them in, add the image number. I go back to image 13, do that, Control A, Control C, and then paste them all in, add the image number, and then I do my sort. So that just kind of helps you see the logic there. Okay, a few other little tips and tricks. I mentioned the surname not being spelled exactly the way I would have expected or that was correct. So census takers, bless their hearts, they don't always have the best penmanship, or at least maybe it's penmanship that we're not as familiar with being able to read. We won't fault them with bad penmanship. I've seen some really beautiful penmanship on original 1800s and early documents that is gorgeous to look at, and I can't read it or I have a hard time with it. So anyway, indexers don't always read their handwriting correctly, whether they wrote it right or not. So one thing to do with your surnames is you're wanting to do a search, and if you're having a hard time finding someone, in addition to making sure that the check variations of spelling is checked on, I will sometimes actually handwrite on a piece of paper my family surname. And then I will start inserting different letters that look like or similar to the letters in my person's name, and just writing out different ways they might have spelled this name, or they might have read the name, substituting capital D's with P's, vice versa, N's with M's, F's with H's. There's so many different variations that someone could interpret a spelling as. So you can also go through a little bit of the footwork or handwriting out these name spellings, and then typing in those spellings into your search engine and see if something comes up that maybe the search engine wasn't catching. So don't rely on the search engine so heavily that you think, oh, there's nothing there. Put a little bit of your brain power into it, and then go ahead and enter those spellings and see if something comes up. And you'll be surprised. You might find some things that you had overlooked before. This is just showing here they read a D as a P, kind of zoomed in on that D. And I can, when you look at the original, you can go, oh, I can see how a census taker is not, they might not be familiar with the name Dempsey. It's not real common. They might be going along, go, oh, that's a P. Just, transcribe it that way. So write their names out and try substituting letters in too. Robert asked a question, are you able to update in the census index spelling? I think what you're asking is, can you make corrections to the census records in Ancestry? And you can make suggestions to Ancestry to, if you run across a record that is not transcribed correctly, you can send an email to them and make a suggestion. Just make sure you reference the image number, the collection name, so that they can get back to it and look at it, and why you think it's not correct. If it's your family that you're researching, and so you're familiar with it and you know what the right spellings are and that kind of thing, for sure you can do that. Another thing you can do in searches is to do a search using a person's initials. So I have an ancestor on this Dempsey line. His name was Berryman Shoemaker, and he often his name was written as BS. And the indexer read this as DS. So again, you want to also do a search for your ancestor with the initials of their name, changing up what those initials are, see if something comes up that might have been indexed incorrectly. And this is also another reason to look on either side of the person when you do find someone you're related to in the census, to look in the pages previous, forward, and back, because I have also found family members that we didn't realize were family by looking in the whole page of the census. I'm just going to give you a quick example from my experience. So I've been looking at census records since I was about 8-9 years old. And you're thinking, what can an 8 or 9-year-old do? Well, not a whole lot. They're going to miss some stuff, but I'll tell you what an 8 or 9-year-old can do. This was so I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but this was before everything was indexed on nice and easy on the computer to just type into a search engine. But the principle that was applied that my mom had me do then, we need to still do as researchers today. I feel pretty strongly about this, right? So she would sit me down at a microfilm machine where you roll, have a little handle and you're scrolling through, looking at the film. And she would say, okay, Nancy, here is the census record in Cave Spring, Georgia. I want you to look for the surname Peterson, Dempsey, Jones, Billings, and Farthing. Here are the surnames I want you to find in this city, in this census for 1870 or 1860. And so I would have a list of all of these names, and I would scroll through page by page and look at every line. And when I would find the name, Mom, I found one. Okay, write it down, Nancy. And I would write it down, what page it was on. And I would give that to my mom. And then she had this lovely list of all the people in the entire city with those surnames. And we're very fortunate now that we don't have to do that. We can rely on these index searches, which are huge time savers, right? And we love it. But sometimes there's information that even that can miss. And so if you're doing a deep dive look at a family and you're looking for the brothers and the sisters and the cousins and the in-laws and all that kind of thing, if you have any indication that you think that you're missing someone, or that you're like, I hope it got everything, you can use this Excel trick to capture all those names that were indexed, as far forward and back from the family as you want to look, see who all the neighbors are, see how close they live to one another. Okay. Another thing I like to do is, once I know where these censuses were taken, is I will go to Google Maps, and because that's the map I like to use. But you can go to whatever map searching device you like, and I will look up the city, and I'll take a look at the churches and the cemeteries and the schools that were in the vicinity. Where could my ancestors might have lived? Depending on what year the census is, it might even have an address that they lived on. You can look up the address where these people lived and get a sense of where they lived. And then I like to grab that little person and drop it on the street and do a street view, and I can take a look as if I'm standing there. I might not get to drive to Georgia very often, but I can hop on the street view and stand and look around the locality and take a look at what these things say. This cemetery is not labeled on the map as Round Hill Cemetery. It is labeled as Cave Spring Cemetery. But when I drop my little pen there, I can see, oh, well, it's labeled as Round Hill Cemetery. It must have been known as that. It was established in 1838. I'm learning stuff that wasn't on the map by looking at the street view. Again, I just want to bring up that, starting in 1900 and also in 1910, they asked the mother how many children were born and how many were living. And M1 is if it's their first marriage. If you see an M2, it's a second marriage, and then it also lists the number of years of that current marriage. And 1910 through 1930 is going to ask questions about immigration and naturalization. So if you have immigrants that you're doing research on, use the census records. They will sometimes list the year that they immigrated, and that will help you know what years to look for their immigration records. On the person page, I will use notes to make a list of all the census records that I've found a person for. This gives me a quick glance of where there might be gaps in the census record if I want to go back and look for a specific year, or a state record if that's an option. And pay attention to names that are repeated in the area. You can create a new private tree to sort out family mysteries. So you can work on a private tree in your Ancestry account that is just dedicated to a certain family or location. So if you think that's helpful, and then it's not on your master main tree that maybe you have shared with everybody, so you work out some of those mysteries that you're trying to solve. And that takes us to the end. You are welcome to email me at this email if you have questions that you feel like would be helpful to have some one-on-one help. I'm always happy to answer questions for people. And the presentation is available at nancybusbyfamilyhistory.com/ancestry. This has got links to past videos that I've done and the current videos, this current presentation's PDF of the slide deck. And thanks for attending.